This is Ryan Hill. This is my gait overview or the critical assignment for Kinesiology 332 Lifelong Motor Development. So the stages of gait and development. There are 4 stages of gait development that we discussed in class. Each stage, as well as their generalized respective identifying qualities, are as followed. Early childhood, where gait is first attempted. Childhood, where gait is increasingly proficient. Adulthood, where gait is perfected or reaches peak efficiency, because not everybody perfects proper gait mechanics. And then older adulthood, where gait deteriorates. I do want to emphasize that this is a generalization. Each individual develops and deteriorates at their own rate. Some don't develop at all, some don't deteriorate at all. It's all up to the individual. So, early childhood gait theories and principles. When learning how to walk in early childhood, it is commonality to find an individual taking wider, smaller steps in order to maximize balance and stability over optimizing mobility. Even despite this wider base, it's still extremely common for an individual to experience falls in this stage. Additionally, the double knee lock is not adopted at this point in gait development. The individual mostly walks with stiffened or straightened legs with little to no flexion or extension in the ankles and little to no hip rotation. The hands are generally placed in a high guard in order to prevent injury in order to prevent injuries to the head during falls. Early childhood gait constraints and abnormalities. The main constraint preventing or inhibiting early childhood gait is leg strength, or really a lack thereof. A toddler obviously can't walk until they have the leg strength necessary to support themselves. Another prominent constraint at this point is a lack of proprioception caused by a lack of experience. This is a cause for new walkers being clumsy and unstable. They generally don't know how to manipulate their body properly, so walking looks very awkward. At this point in development, constraints are almost exclusively individual rather than social or environmental. Not to say that there are no social or environmental constraints in this stage, it's just they aren't near as prominent as personal constraints. What would be considered abnormalities in adults are generally common to toddlers. These usually correct themselves over time. This includes, but is not limited to, knee valgus or varus, which is knock knees and bow-legged, respectively, and flat feet. Abnormalities that are of genuine concern in toddlers, include but are not limited to limping. This is usually caused by pain or just weakness in one of the limbs. Excessive hip abduction on forward swing, excessive falls and clumsiness. Like I said earlier, falls are extremely common, but there is a limit to this. And contralateral dropping of the hips in opposition to raising the contralateral hip, which is considered proper. Childhood gait theories and principles. At this stage in development, an individual begins to show proficiency in gait. The individual should have adopted by this point the double knee lock and narrowed their stance in order to increase mobility. They should also be performing flexion and extension of the ankle and hip, or of the ankle and hip rotation on each step. The hand should now be consistently placed in a low guard, and synchronized oppositional arm swing should be present. Mastery is not yet achieved at this stage, and conscious effort is still used during gait. This inhibits the ability to multitask with the upper and lower extremities. Childhood gait constraints. At this point in development, constraints tend to shift further towards social and environmental factors until they reach a balance between the three. Play is a leading factor in development at this stage, and because activity brings experience and proficiency with it. The main social constraint in developing gait through play is the availability of playmates, whether that's a parent, sibling, friend, whatever. A child will not be inclined to be active without someone to engage with. The main environmental constraint is having somewhere safe to play. Without somewhere safe to play, children tend to be inclined to partake in sedentary activities such as watching TV or playing video games. There are many individual constraints involved in walking, including but not limited to leg strength, coordination, and proprioceptive abilities. An increasingly common individual constraint that can be found in childhood obesity. Childhood obesity reduces the flexibility and increases the work required and decreases the capacity for physical ability in the individual. At this point in development, each gait abnormality that were named commonplace in the the gait abnormalities that were named commonplace in the early childhood gait constraints and abnormalities section should have been corrected. So this is the stuff like, knee valgus, varus, and flat feet. An abnormality that was not present in early development is the appearance and persistence of toe walking. This can be identified with the absence of a heel strike in the initial contact phase of gait. It is generally caused by a tightness in the gastrocnemius or the calf muscle, but can be an indication of autism or cerebral palsy. Adulthood gait theories and principles. By this stage of development, mastery of gait is achieved. It doesn't require or requires very little conscious effort in order to walk. Development varies significantly to the individual, so proper mechanics should be present by this point. These include heel striking, double knee lock, pelvic rotation, increased stride length, and oppositional synchronized arm swing. Adulthood gait constraints. At this point in development, gait constraints shift back into being primarily concerned with individual ability and constraints. Again, this is not to say that social and environmental factors don't have any play in this. It's primarily concerned with the individual. Weight gain and loss can affect mobility, force production requirements, balance, and coordination of an individual, thereby advancing or regressing their gait pattern, respectively. Injuries can also play a significant role in gait patterns. Injury can produce limping, loss of balance, instability, and a loss of mobility. Abnormalities. The most common gait abnormalities in adulthood derive from structural misalignments in the body or from injuries. This includes, but is not limited to, again, knee valgus and varus, scoliosis, lower cross syndrome, and limping from an injury. A specific type of gait abnormality that's increasingly present due to the rise in obesity is called a waddling gait. This involves the individual walking predominantly straight-legged and using exaggerated hip abduction and raising the contralateral hip in order to walk. Think of it just like waddling like a duck. This happens because the muscles in the legs are not strong enough to bear the load of the body weight while bent. so they literally don't have the strength to support themselves to walk. Older adulthood gait theories and principles. Gait in older adulthood and gait in childhood are actually very similar. Both demonstrate wider, shortened steps in order to maximize balance and stability. Neither party performs hip rotation with forward swing, and both walk flat-footed and do not perform double knee lock. And again, this is just a generalization. Obviously, there's very healthy older adults that walk perfectly fine, run, are very active, that kind of thing. And we'll get into that a little bit in the next section. Older adulthood gait constraints. Gait constraints in older adulthood can be summed up with all of the aforementioned constraints, except play in childhood, although activity levels are still an applicable constraint. Generally, the more active a older adult is, the less deterioration they'll face, both in their proprioceptive abilities, their balance, their stability, all that kind of stuff. Additionally, injuries do play an increased role in older adulthood, as the likelihood of getting injured increases as the body's durability decreases with age. As perceptive and proprioceptive abilities decrease with age, so does balance and reaction time. So this means that older adults are more susceptible to tripping hazards, obstacles, things in that matter. Abnormalities. Similarly to adulthood, many gait abnormalities in older adulthood stem from injury or structural misalignment. But most abnormalities stem from muscular dystrophy or muscle loss, cognitive decline, and conditions that develop with age, such as arthritis. Many types of gait abnormalities associated with aging have been given names, and they are as follows. Propulsive gait, which is a hunched, stiff posture with the head and neck bent forward. Think of like hunchback. A waddling gait, which we discussed earlier, that duck-like walk. Broad-based gait, feet wide apart with irregular movement and no heel strike, causing the feet to slap the ground. And then magnetic gait, which is essentially just shuffling the feet. They don't pick up their legs with flexion of the hamstring, really at any point in the step. Summary. The 4 stages of gait development that we covered in this class are early childhood, adulthood, and older adulthood. Gait patterns change significantly throughout the lifespan, as you saw throughout this presentation, and constraints and gait abnormalities mostly change throughout the lifespan, but some remain constant, such as knee valgus and varus. I forgot to mention earlier in the adulthood section, but generally when you see knee valgus and varus in adulthood, it's because of underdeveloped musculature in the hips or the adductors. And this is the reference page. Thank you for your time.